The current UFC middleweight champion, Dricus Du Plessis, has been a bona fide violence merchant for years, and you can really see it in this early career matchup with Rafal Heretic. Postured up from a dominant top position, DDP starts to rain down with some hellacious ground and pound, breaking through the defenses his opponent was trying to put up and forcing him to try and shrimp out. But once Dricus was satisfied that he had landed enough elbows, he switched his focus to his opponent's neck, latching onto a choke in rapid fashion, exploding from his first position into the perfect spot to crank on this fight-ending sub. And sure enough, the tap came shortly after, marking his 10th professional fight with a big win. This would also be DDP's middleweight debut, a road that he would follow all the way to the very top of the sport. The knockouts will eventually come, but you might be surprised to know just how well regarded Dricus was for his submission ability during these early years. The guy had found victory 10 times before he took on Yannick Bahati, and 7 of them had come by way of sub, with the other 3 by TKO. And this time, though DDP had a reputation, that didn't stop his opponent from trying to wrestle him to the mat. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a huge mistake. Du Plessis anticipated this shot perfectly and latched onto his signature guillotine immediately, cranking on his opponent and snapping them down to the ground. In a matter of seconds, it became clear that Bahati was in trouble, and then a few seconds later, the tap was forced. Yet another easy submission victory for Du Plessis. After winning promotional gold in his home of South Africa under the EFC banner, DDP was invited to compete in the European promotion KSW, receiving an immediate title shot against Roberto Soldic, a highly regarded fighter who to this day is among the best welterweights in the world outside of the UFC. But Dricus was more dangerous than anyone truly realized at the time, and sure enough, he landed big on Soldic in a sloppy exchange, moving in for the finish and earning his second promotional belt, edging him one step closer to a spot on the UFC roster. Soldic would prove his quality, however, by storming his way to a knockout in their rematch, KOing Dricus in the 3rd round. Remember, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single upload. Yet another example of DDP's raw physical strength was on display here as he totally stifled his BJJ black belt opponent Yoitin Santos from top position. Dricus has a level of technique to what he does, of course, but when he gets his prey backed into a corner, they often have no answer to his overbearing control and pressure. And in this bout, once the ground and pound shots started flying, it was pretty much the beginning of the end for his opponent. One more big win on the record of this promising young African prospect, and at this point, many MMA fans were starting to take note of his talents. Everything we love about DDP was on full display with this final fight on the regional scene. He was taking on Brendan Lazar and proceeded to land a huge punch that rocked and dropped his adversary. And once he had him in the right position, DDP snatched a hold of his neck with lightning-fast speed, putting Lazar in the toughest possible spot. It came as no surprise when the tap followed shortly after. Dricus had once again proven just how well-rounded he was, and it was this win that finally caused the UFC to take notice, signing Du Plessis to a multi-fight deal. Little did they know that they had managed to unearth yet another future champion with this guy. Another display of huge punching power from DDP got him in the win against Marcus Perez. Dricus doesn't even necessarily need to land cleanly to hurt his rival, and sure enough, Perez got tagged with a half-landed punch, and it was enough to totally sway the momentum in this bout. DDP's UFC account had been opened up in style, with this first KO setting the tone for what would eventually follow, a run of wins that would lead him all the way to that coveted UFC title. Dricus's reputation as a fighter who is never out of a contest was sealed when once again he found himself pushed up against the cage by Trevin Giles, seemingly in a position where he was in danger. But yet again, in that moment of potential crisis, DDP struck, landing a huge shot that instantly flipped this bout's momentum on its head. Before anyone knew what was happening, Du Plessis was moving in for the kill. Yet another finish on his record and proof that he was ready for a big step up. Knowing how to play to your own strengths is one thing, but if you can capitalize on your opponent's weaknesses, you'll become a different level of threat entirely. And for DDP, striking with Darren Till was always going to be a tougher route to victory than exploiting his weakness on the mat. And sure enough, Du Plessis' takedowns could not have been any easier to come by in this one. Upon finding the perfect moment, DDP exploded into a takedown, toppling Till over easily, landing directly into a strong mount. And once he had him there, Dricus sliced through his defenses with ease, finding a rear naked choke and an incredibly quick tap from the Englishman. DDP's ability to persevere through tricky moments has become one of his standout skills. The guy can just seem like he's totally exhausted, only to find that extra gear when all hope appears to be lost. And early on against the veteran Derek Brunson, it seemed like Du Plessis had finally hit his wall, struggling to deal with a guy in Brunson who could match him physically. But in that second round, we saw Derek start to fade, and by the closing stages of that 5-minute period, DDP was in total control, hammering away at his opponent mercilessly until the end of round bell saved Brunson, or so it seemed. By the time he was required to make it back to his corner stool, Brunson was clearly out of it, unable to take any more damage, succumbing to a TKO stoppage. A vintage performance from DDP. But if you're looking for the performance that truly broke DDP through to that next level, it was his shockingly good night in there with the former champ Robert Whittaker. Du Plessis came into this one with some level of hype, sure, but we all thought of him as more of a wild man than a guy who could actually step up to the plate and put on a well-balanced performance against a fighter as good as Bobby Knuckles. However, on fight night, that's exactly what we got. It was the physicality of Dricus that was truly the difference maker here. He had the ability to hurt Whittaker consistently in this bout, and when the second round came, you could see this future champion's confidence start to grow. Once he had Whittaker badly hurt, his natural finishing instincts came into play. Before anyone knew what was happening, one of the greatest fighters of his era was being beaten down for a TKO stoppage. And with that, the middleweight division crowned a new top contender. We all know what happened next. On the back of that huge victory over Robert Whittaker, DDP was set up for a title fight with the newly crowned Sean Strickland, who had just shocked the world by beating Israel Adesanya in a striking matchup. This fight didn't produce a highlight to go with the rest of these, nor was it without its fair share of controversy. But in the end, this narrow battle went in favor of DDP, making him South Africa's first ever UFC champion and the reigning king of the middleweight division.